Welcome to the Soft Matter Show. This is Amal Narayanan. I'm a chemist and a polymer scientist. In this podcast, we will talk about soft matter science and have fireside chats with the researchers. Please enjoy the show. Hello, soft matter enthusiasts. Welcome to another episode of the Soft Matter Show. Our today's guest is Dr. Arthi Jayaraman. Arthi is a professor with joint appointments at the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering and the Department of Material Science and Engineering at the University of Delaware. Arthi is a skilled multitasker and manages to be on the editorial board of multiple prestigious journals and organizes outreach events while being a full-time professor. In this episode, Arthi shared her journey from being a student to a professor. In addition to the fabulous simulations Arthi's team is creating at Delaware, our stand at the research philosophy Arthi has cultivated. Arthi also shared her responsibilities as an editorial board member and how she manages her time. This episode, I believe, is a fantastic combination of life and philosophy of research. I hope all of you enjoy this. We had Dr. Arthi Jayaraman here with us today. Arthi is a centennial term professor for excellence in research and teaching with joint appointment at the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering and Department of Material Science and Engineering at the University of Delaware. Arthi is an expert in molecular level simulations of polymers and soft materials. For her exemplary contributions in the field of polymer science, Arthi has been awarded DOE Early Career Research Award, and in 2020, Arthi was inducted as Fellow of American Physical Society. Also, Arthi is the Deputy Editor of ACS Polymers AU and the Associate Editor of Macromolecules. With that introduction, let's hear from Arthi. Welcome to the Soft Matter Show, Arthi.
Thanks, Amal. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's so fun to have you here. So one of the questions I have to ask you is that when you transitioned or when you were back in India doing as a bachelor's student and as an engineer, chemical engineer, have you ever dreamt of having a career in academia when you were a college student?
It's funny you ask that. My undergraduate friends will tell you that I said on day one of undergrad that I was going to be a professor in chemical engineering. And I think they all thought I was a little crazy for knowing that. But I think that was because of some of the influences I had. I had great role models in my life. My sister is a professor. Her husband, my brother-in-law, is a professor. And my parents really valued education and always said, university education is very important. And so they raised both their daughters to end up becoming academics. Mm-hmm. So much to most people's surprise, I said on day one of undergrad that I wanted to be a professor. So yes, I guess I was dreaming of it and it has become reality.
So how do you feel like when you got your first appointment? Then how did you feel like?
So I think growth towards becoming an independent PI, right, is it happens right through grad school, through postdoc. So it didn't feel like a first order phase transition. Sorry, I'm a soft matter person and a thermodynamic and a lover of thermodynamics.
We love talking about thermodynamics here. So.
Right? Yeah. So it was actually, I would say, a gradual transition for me. And I'll be honest, I feel like I've continued to grow even as a professor. Every day, I think I am maybe one step further, hopefully not two steps back, one step further from where I was the day before. So I think the intellectual growth has always happened. There have been few, I think obviously when you go from being a grad student to a postdoc, you have different challenges at that point. And then from postdoc to a PI, you have different challenges. You now have a team that looks up to you and you have their responsibility on your shoulders. So there have been different, maybe small, localized transitions in that way. But I can't think of one day saying, oh my God, I'm finally a professor. Of course, it was a joy when I got my first job, obviously. But I really enjoyed the growth, and I still feel like I continue to grow as a teacher, as a mentor, as a researcher, as a human being. And each year is different compared to the year before. That's how I feel.
So it keeps you alive, because like I know people who we are being in academia, they end up interacting with people from of different age group, and especially young people always. So that gives you an energy of continuing in staying in the field.
Absolutely. Yeah. That young, vibrant youth that you're surrounded by. I mean, my fellow colleagues, faculty members are also young. I'm not saying they're not, but definitely being in a classroom, being among students, postdocs of different age groups, backgrounds, cultures, it's constantly entertaining in a way, right? In a way, it makes you feel like it's never going to be stagnant ever. It never, at least I don't see it that way. And the day probably that I feel everything's just sort of stagnated is probably the day I should retire. But up until then, I think I will keep learning and enjoying.
Yeah. I completely agree with your statement. So you're talking about the role models that you had during your transition. So if you don't mind, like who are they, and like how did they influence your decisions?
Right. So I would say it starts with my parents. Both my father and my mother were just absolutely great role models as people. They always emphasized, like I said, the value of education, how important it was. I came from a lower middle class family, so we didn't have a lot of money. So my parents prioritized all their resources towards our education, my sister and myself. So that showed that was important to them, right? So then naturally you start valuing what your parents value. They also really believed in social service. They believed in giving back to the community, and they did it in their own way. And those were the times that I would be at home with my sister because I knew my parents were out doing social service. So that was, I think, two things that they really put into us. And also just being honest and not being unkind, being kind. Those are all aspects that are needed when you're a faculty member. I think these are things that are important. Then as my sister is a professor of biochemistry, and I still remember I was in high school when she was doing her PhD actually at Princeton, and she once called home and said, "My first author paper is in science."
Wow.
See, right. Now we know how cool that is. But when I was then a student in high school, I'm going, what is she so excited about science? I just got an article in my local school science magazine. Little did I know what it meant. And that excitement that she always had about science, I think, really influenced me. And like I said, right, when at every stage you're influenced by others, we had this conversation before we got online, that we hear others' excitement and that influences us. So I think her excitement influenced me. Her personality is different from mine, but that excitement for science was very cool. So I think these were my biggest influences. And then obviously I have extended family who are also chemical engineers, my brother-in-law, etc. And he has always had conversations with me about chemical engineering and about science and research. And so that is the influence on chemical engineering, me deciding to be, I think, a chemical engineer. The value of role models is so, so, so important. I mean, it really, I think, frames our mind towards what we want, what we end up doing. And I do give all credit to my role models.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. You have very inspiring family. So I had this, yes. I had this weird theory that, like I'm also coming from a lower middle class, from India. So I have a theory that like the people who are elder, like I have an elder brother, they don't get to generally do what they want to do. But we
get to be the lucky ones.
To be that lucky one to like do whatever, and they've
tested it out for us.
Yeah, so it works out for me as well. So it's an interesting theory, which most of the time works. So yeah, since we are talking about the chemical engineering aspect of it, like when you get introduced to engineering or any engineering other than computer science or IT, so you would be excited to see like how the reactions work or how the thermodynamics come in like in real life. So one of the questions I have, like if it's for an undergrad, what is the real difference between the experimental, computational, and theoretical research for a engineer?
That's a good one. So maybe I can go a little bit backwards
Sure.
to tell you a little bit of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then it can tell you why I have this answer. So I actually was absolutely in love with computer science. I was one hell of a programmer when I was in school. I had two amazing teachers, Nirmala Devi and Harifa Begum. They were both such great, they just really made it sound like fun. So we would all go to our computer lab with a lot of fun. So I loved computers. That was one thing. I also liked math, chemistry, and physics. So for me, chemistry itself was not what pulled me. Many people say they loved chemistry and that pulled them towards chemical engineering. I've heard that. For me, it was really not just that. It was just a combination. And then obviously I've learned through various people who are chemical engineers that you can really bring all these four things together, right? Math, physics, chemistry, and computer science. And now we realize biomolecular engineering is also a part of bio. So really brings all the subjects that I enjoyed together. So that is what got me into chemical engineering. So I do love math. So that was not something I wanted to run away from. I actually enjoyed it. So during, I think, when I've taught within chemical engineering, I've taught the earliest class, the first introduction to chemie, right? Intro to material science and materials and energy balances. I've also taught close to the final senior lab and process control. So I've seen the spectrum through my teaching and through and through that I've interacted with students at these different stages. Oftentimes early on, they just want to know what is different between chemistry and chemical engineering. Forget theory, simulations, experiments. No, they just want to know that early on. What is the difference between chemistry and chemical engineering? So then they start to realize the length scales. And now they also start, at least this is what I do in my classes, also get them to see that when you think of chemical engineering, don't just think process. You can also have molecular level that influences some of the process. So now we really do that whole spectrum of length scales. And then as I get to final stages in their senior lab or in their process control class, this is where we start to put all these things together. And there you use computational tools. There's obviously established theories based on thermodynamics and foundations in thermodynamics. You're using that and combining everything they've learned together. So I honestly see chemical engineering as really a combination of everything. Theory, simulation, experiments, all put together, even at the undergraduate level. Now, at the graduate level, now is where students start to specialize a little bit more. At least that's how I see it. For me, the drive towards computation was, like I said, I love programming. And I saw two great advisors that I could have worked with. So I chose the route of computational research within chemical engineering. I loved thermo, so it all made sense. But I tell students when they come in, oftentimes when they come to talk to me, they say, I don't know if I should join your group because I've had no background in simulations or no background in the theory where it doesn't even show up at that point. It's usually that. So I tell students, think of all of these as tools to study problems, right? And you're learning to be an expert with one of these tools. So maybe you're going to be an expert with the experimental tools. You're still going to play around with some simulations or computational tools. If you're focused on becoming a computational researcher, then your focus ends up being on those tools. Maybe this is molecular modeling simulation. Maybe it's optimization. Maybe it's another level, quantum level. So it could be some level of computations, and those tools are what you want to become an expert at. At the same time, you can never forget that there are experimentalists working on the same problem. So for me personally and in my group, I tell my students, you're going to be experts with these tools, but you need to learn to communicate with people who are using other tools for the same problem. So I don't see any of these as isolated. I just see these as expertise areas for studying problems. My group's expertise ends up being more on the simulation side. We use theory, liquid state theory here and there, but it's primarily molecular modeling and simulations. But we work closely with folks who do experiments, and we realize that both these tools are often needed to work together to understand the problem. So yeah, I don't see these necessarily as completely
I completely get it. That's a wonderful philosophy, actually. Like when normally when you talk to people, the obvious answer would be like, if you're working on a piece of paper, then you're theoretical. Then if you're working on a computer, then computational. But I think this is more more broader, and at the same time it's more healthier philosophy in terms of realizing, I mean, that doesn't limit you, right? Like one day you want to start doing experiments, you can. So yeah, that's a wonderful philosophy.
You'll just learn those tools at whatever pace you learn it at.
And I had never heard that before, but I think that is a wonderful philosophy. So since we are talking about the way you approach a problem, so can you tell me some of the examples for those, what you do in your lab? Like, how do you use your approach to further exploit one problem?
So maybe, I mean, there are lots of different problems I can give as examples, or maybe I can tell you a couple of sort of umbrellas under which multiple problems probably fit in really well. So I'll give you two examples. Within my group, we focus sometimes on really nice model development. And why do we care about model development? Because the problem that came to our hand dictated that we create a new model because the existing models don't work. So there are problems like that. So one particular set of models that we started to develop in the last few years and now have realized the potential of that model for a variety of problems where that works well is ones where we look at coarse graining of polymers, which I know many groups do. But within these coarse grain models, the ability to program in directional interactions. Now, if you think of DNA, proteins, or many polysaccharides or synthetic polymers, hydrogen bonding, pi-pi stacking, these are very dominant interactions in some of those materials. If you try to model them using atomistic simulations, well, sure, you'll have all of the details, but it's very localized. The polymer length scales and time scales are very hard to capture with simulations that are atomistically detailed. They take forever. On the other hand, coarse grain models that were existing in the literature are all isotropically interacting, right? So if you have local directional interaction that gives valency, those won't do well. So we started to think of these models that have a bit of both. They have local directionality programmed into the coarse grain models. So then you have structures that are coming about because of those directional interactions that you would have missed either atomistically because you can't go to polymers there, or in coarse grain you can't get it because it's isotropic. So that's an umbrella that I think has multiple projects within my group. So one student works on collagen-like peptides that are coming together because of directional interactions. One's looking at cellulose, methyl cellulose, and some students are looking at synthetic polymers that have hydrogen bonding. The other side of my group is one where we realize that the existing models work fine for the problem at hand, but the methods don't. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in one of the projects we worked on, and I talked a lot about that. I've talked a lot about that in conferences in the past year. Was one where we realized that when experimentalists are characterizing a assembled structure in a soft material solution, so polymer solution or colloidal solution, they often go to scattering. And they go get, say, small angle neutron scattering or X-ray scattering results. And these profiles that you get from those scatterings are often an intensity versus wave vector profile. Okay, they look like a function, mathematical function, and people go then fit analytical, so theoretical models onto them to get the information about the structure. But what we realized working with some really cool synthetic chemists is that they can make really cool polymers and create structures that are not conventional. So many of these analytical models that were derived for conventional systems don't work. So what do? How do we take that scattering information and create the visual picture of the structure for that solution? So then we developed a method called CREASE, which is basically a genetic algorithm-based method, but you could technically create this through other optimization techniques too, where we basically take in the scattering profile and build back the visual picture of the structure whose computed scattering matches up with the experimental scattering. So that's a method that we realize become really important in a lot of different systems that we're working on where the existing analytical models maybe don't work. Mm-hmm. Or as we think in the future, as people start to generate more and more experimental scattering profiles through automation, they can't have a human sitting and pressing the button and doing analytical model fit. So they need some automated analyzing technique too. So that's another part. So I think that's probably how I would describe some of the excitement in the group. Is there are projects where there's some really cool model that we had to develop because the problem asked for it and existing models wouldn't have worked. Or we say the models are fine, but we need some computational methods that are not there right now that the field needs or that problem needs. That's, I think, how we develop methods. And then obviously the science that comes out after that, right? Because you use this model, because you use this method, what cool science did you get? That is, of course, project dependent and question dependent. So there are really cool new insights. We end up getting new polymer physics that we end up getting because we use some of these newer models or methods.
So
that's, I think,
going back to your first point on the simulation approaches for identifying the molecular interaction. So one thing I was not clear was that what was lacking before. So I know atomistic simulations can show you the interactions, and the coarse grain cannot. Then
right. So let's say, for example, you want to work with a solution of polymers that all have hydrogen bonding interaction as the dominant interaction. And they are essentially in one state disordered. So they're not forming any ordered structure. And you want to predict, say, at a certain condition, whatever that is. It could be a temperature. It could be maybe the design of the polymer itself. Maybe it's a concentration. We want to predict what ordered structure it forms. For the system like polymer solutions to go from disordered to ordered state, those timescales are very large. So atomistic level models can capture the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, all the acceptor donor of the hydrogen, but the movement of these large polymers from a disordered to ordered state wouldn't be possible with simulations that use atomistic models. Now, of course, if you already knew the structure and then you're trying to see what locally, how they are wiggling about in that local structure, sure, you can go to atomistic. But many of the questions we want to go after involve predicting an ordered structure that we didn't know ahead of time, that came about because of that hydrogen bonding or because of a directional interaction, say pi-pi stacking.
Sure.
So then we need some models that allow you to do those large length scales and time scales. This is why people have been doing coarse graining. But then if you have everything as isotropically interacting, you have no directionality. Then your structures that you're predicting aren't correct. So you need coarse grain models, yes, but we need coarse grain models that have that local directionality programmed in.
Sure.
So that's why we started to work with some of those models. And there were some of these ideas already out there. We just adapted them to specific polymer families, right? Peptides or oligonucleic acids or synthetic polymers. We had to rebuild some of those models to be more applicable for these systems. So that was the excitement there.
Yeah. So in conjunction with that, so I was wondering, like, what are the real life implications of the whatever you learn from those systems? What does it mean in reality? Because when you talk about soft materials and polymers, it has a wide range of applications.
Right.
But specifically for your type of problems, what do you think is the real life implications of the research?
So maybe I can give you two examples.
Sure.
So one is almost an industrially motivated problem. So that's as real life gets. So one particular company was interested in knowing why some of their polysaccharide-based chemistries, why they were soluble in certain conditions and not soluble in certain conditions. And I'm trying to be a little bit vague because, it's an industry-related problem. But there they figured out, and they gave us this insight that it was related to hydrogen bonding, and there was functionalization that removed some of that hydrogen bonding. And so they wanted to know in which regimes the hydrogen bonding was so strong among the chains that they phase separated, and in which regimes. Now, these regimes could be related to the solution conditions. These could be related to the design of the polymer itself. But which regimes those hydrogen bonding interactions are not strong enough that they phase separate and instead they remain soluble. So that's an example. So, for example, if you think of methyl cellulose, which everyone knows a lot about, versus cellulose, part of the reason methyl cellulose has such interesting phase behavior compared to cellulose is because along the chain, some of the hydrogen bonding donors, acceptors are silenced by functionalizing with methyl groups. So how you functionalize, how much is functionalized that then leads to solubility is something we can predict with these models, right? Because these are large length scales, time scale simulations. So that's one. So solubility and where it's soluble, how can we make it more soluble? This is obviously important in industry and other formulations that people work with that even we may use. Second example is more on the biological side. So say one of my collaborators at UD, she works with April Cox, and she works with collagen-like peptides. My other collaborator, Christy Kick, also works with collagen-like peptides. In all of their biomaterials, the stability of the triple helix, collagen triple helix, dictates a lot about the hierarchical, higher level structures that can form through the assembly of the helices. But those helices have to be stable. And through those higher level structures, they are making mimics of biological tissue, right? So that's outside my area of expertise, but I can tell them what makes something thermodynamically stable. So we can then predict for the design of the collagen-like peptides where these helices remain stable, and then they know those temperature ranges where the higher order structures are stable because that collagen-like peptide triple helix is stable. So this gives design rules for creation of materials that could be biologically mimicking tissue, or that could be mimicking biological tissue, or mimicking structures that can then be used in biomedical applications. So these are current examples that more recently. In the past, we've obviously worked on other materials that were used for gene delivery. And we've seen that work in vivo, not in our lab, but in collaborators' lab, work well in vivo as well. So designing polymers that are used in vivo. In all these, I mean, this is a good question you ask, because I think that's related to also the philosophy in my group, is we should do all of our work, at least as an engineer, and that gives me a kick. We should do work that eventually feeds into real life problems. We may not be solving cancer in person. We may not be making the next best material in our lab. But if we are able to provide insights that enable that, that itself is to us very rewarding and very, I think, also encourages us as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. So this question is like, it's different. I mean, because when I ask people from simulation background, it's generally a different answer that I get. So the question is that, how do you hire people? Like, what are the things that you look for while hiring a person for your lab? Because how much background do you expect them to have in terms of programming? Because there will be people who may not be very proficient in programming, but they will be interested in the cool aspects of, or learning. So how do you hire PhDs and postdocs or even master students in your group?
Right. This is a very, very important question, because this is something I bring up when students come talk to me, and sometimes they bring that up. I am not looking to train programmers. So those who are interested in programming, it's great. It's like being interested in a tool that you want to use in a lab, right? For me, the people who join my group and that succeed are ones who are really curious about the science. Why did this work well? Oh, this came out. This was unexpected. This is exciting. That's that curiosity, that wanting to be challenged to get the satisfaction of seeing some cool science. That is the quality that I tell people they should have. Nobody was born to do experiments. They all got trained at some point. No one was born to be a programmer either. We just learn and, get a kick out of it. So to me, the computational background, if it's there and that kept you happy, that's great. But you should come into my group because you love materials. You want to know why something works well. Why doesn't it work well? And wanting to be challenged. If you want to, something that goes, oh, yeah, it worked, everything's great, that's fine. But you also should be really looking to be challenged to think, oh, this didn't work. Let's try to figure out why it didn't work. Let's do this. Let's do that. Oh, this worked. Why did it work? I didn't think it was going to work. That is what I think at least that's what keeps me going. And obviously, if you're working in my group, our group personality is obviously the other part, right? Your personality should match up with ours. So I think it's less about having experience with programming or even computational tools. I think that's something you can learn. I obviously can't teach curiosity, neither can my group members. We work in a very collaborative environment. You have to be curious. You have to be excited by science and be ready to be challenged. Not everything, we all know this, this. I've been grad student, you've been grad student. Not everything we try works, and it can be frustrating. But also being still motivated by the potential excitement that can come if we keep pushing this and seeing other ways to approach this problem. That, I think, is more important. I think, and each person in my group has different level of comfort or a flair when it comes to coding. Some people are just naturally, they can code in the most optimal ways, and some people maybe don't code in the most optimal ways. That's okay, as long as the science can still progress. Great. In some cases, we have to optimize code because without optimization of that programming code, the simulation could take a very long time or the method could take long. Sure, in those cases, we do need to push our comfort level on the computational side. But again, that's something that can be learned. That's, I think, how I usually say, this is when you should join my group and you shouldn't join to program. That's not the reason to join my group.
So you mean the courage to fail and curiosity are two important factors that you look for.
Absolutely.
Than way more than the programming capabilities.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting output of the question, because like it's more important to ask for simulation people, because experimental, I don't know, for some reason people think, anyone can start doing an experiment one day, which probably you can, but yeah. So
I think every tool has its difficulties and a learning curve.
Sure.
If someone tells someone it's easy to do an experiment, I disagree. At the same time, if someone says, anybody can pick up simulation, it's just punching a bunch of numbers, I don't agree with that either.
Sure.
I think every tool has its learning curve, difficulties, challenges, limitations. As long as we remember that and we're ready to learn, that's all that matters.
Sure. Yeah, let me try to switch the gear a little bit. Mm-hmm. We have been talking about your background. We have been talking about how you approach a problem and the superb research that you do in your lab. But at the same time, for somehow you find time to do a lot of extracurricular activities, which includes being the editorial board member of different journals, and you have been involved in something called Women Excelling in Computational Molecular Engineering. So I really want to know more about that Welcome seminar series, which is the Women Excelling Computational Molecular Engineering seminar series. How did that came in place, and how is it going?
Yeah, great. Absolutely happy to talk about these other things that are very near and dear to my heart. That's what I would say. I think that's how you make time. When something you're passionate about, you just make time for it. So this Welcome seminar series is Welcome, W Women, E and L comes from excelling, C computational, CO computational molecular engineering. Welcome seminar series came about this past year when conferences were basically closed, and essentially all the networking opportunities that students and postdocs, especially towards their last year, right, senior students, this was something that was lost. So I felt that this would be a great opportunity to create something that allows us in a way to bring members of the community together. At the same time, it also serves as a platform for the senior students and postdocs to highlight themselves. And to be able to do that, you obviously also need PI speakers to also attract the crowd to come in. And so this basically came about from that. So this ended up being a whole year event. So once a month, we had these seminars. We obviously, when I say we, it was basically me and Professor Claire McCabe at Vanderbilt. She was very, very excited about the idea, so we worked together. And so the way I organized this is only to have the month where there were no other conferences. So there were still virtual conferences going on. There's no need to add one more Zoom hour that month. So those months where we didn't have any event, we planned 1 hour in the middle of the month. Everything was scheduled till May. So we ended up having 8 such seminars. Each hour we had 2 PI speakers and 2 speakers, student speakers or postdocs. And these were selected from nominations we got from all PIs, regardless of gender identity. Now, I wanted obviously to focus a little bit on the women in computational molecular engineering. Partly because I'm aware of the challenges. Some I have faced, some I've heard from others. But I also read a lot of literature that said that this COVID year was extraordinarily harder on women, young faculty members, women faculty members, mothers, those who have to take care of children, and even Zoom fatigue. Something like Zoom fatigue is apparently much stronger on women for various psychological reasons. New York Times talked about it. So I wanted it to be a focus on these amazing, talented scientists, women scientists in the computational community, polymer science is one side of what I do. Obviously, computation is the other. So that was sort of what the focus was. And I kept it in chemical engineering, and Professor Claire McCabe agreed, because we can't obviously open it up for too many. After all, I was doing all of the registration and all of the little things that were involved, so to keep it feasible. So this was sort of our way to bring community together. And every month we ended up having close to 100, 110. Our last one, we had the smallest, probably Zoom fatigue hit everybody. Mm-hmm. But we had great attendance from around the world, industry, national lab, professors, students from around the world taking part. And I used social media to advertise it for registration. And I think it was a success. Maybe I'm biased, but I got to hear great talks. That's all that matters.
If you have like 100 attendants, even if they are not keeping the camera on, this still is a success for a Zoom call, because it's
exactly
because people have been going through a lot of conferences. I mean, I attended like 2 or 3 conferences online, but very few of them were like engaging. But because it's very distracting, right? Like you're using the same set of, at the same time you're receiving the emails, you're receiving the, it is very hard to keep yourself focused unless you like plug off from everything. So which is very, very, I mean, I would like to congratulate you on on organizing this. And like, are you planning to continue this next year, or what is the thought?
Before we say that, I do also want to say that we had amazing moderators, and these were not just women. Obviously, these were a lot of great early career male PIs as well as women PIs who had just started. They ran every hour really well. So it was easy for me from that perspective that I could just enjoy the talks.
Sure.
For now, we felt like because things are getting back to normal and going back to in-person, I don't see if this is needed yet. I've also said to folks that if they want to continue this, they obviously can. It's very much doable, but we've officially, of course, ended it in May. And I'm hopeful to see people in person. So I personally don't want to sit in front of Zoom absolutely necessary. So that's,
one of the ways that you could use is because you can probably, enroll the same in ACS or APS and then create a session then that this could continue on, which could be also a nice way to do it. So, so let me talk about the other part of your life, the being the editor part of the life. So I've been waiting my whole life to ask to an editor. So let me ask you, first question is like, how many submissions do you get, or how many emails do you get per day?
I think I would change that up, and maybe I'll tell you what are the different things I do, because then each paper is so different that the effort on each paper is in some cases completely different from another paper. So I'll maybe tell you the roles that I have.
Sure.
So first of all, I was really fortunate that in macromolecules, the editor-in-chief, Mark Hillmeyer, asked me if I would like to be an associate editor. I think that was very eye-opening. Like you said, we all depend on our research getting out. I mean, in the end, we do the science. If it's lost in the lab or inside a little notebook somewhere, it's lost. Science is meant to be shared. So, and publications are how we all are evaluated to a large extent in terms of success and future jobs. So for me, that the idea of peer review, the publications, that is something that is obviously very important. So I was happy that I was given this opportunity. So it started off all with macromolecules as an associate editor. I wasn't their advisory board before, but as an advisory board, you really just advise. You don't do the editorial work. So then in macromolecules, there are different tiers of editors who handle different levels of paper based on experiences. And like I said, each paper is also different, right? Sometimes, so when the paper comes to us, is assigned from the editor-in-chief or the deputy editor to the associate editor, and then the associate editor then reads through the paper to see if it fits the scope of the journal. And if it does fit the scope, does it reach the goals? For example, in macromolecules, you may say that the goal is to really advance fundamental science. Does it do that? If it doesn't, at least this is what most editors think, I can't speak for all, is should we let the authors know that this doesn't, there's no need for you to be wasting time trying to go through review here, only for the reviewers to say the same thing, right? So then you say, okay, this is not going to be reviewed because it doesn't fit the scope or it doesn't fit what we're looking for in papers. And so then it essentially, if it does pass that level of screening, we say, yeah, it makes sense. Let's send it out for reviews. Then you have to choose the right set of reviewers who will be able to give the most objective review, a fair review. And so a good number of reviews as well, because some journals expect 3, some expect 5, some expect 2. Sometimes you get 3 because 2 were so different. All of that work, that's where I think it becomes different for each paper. Sometimes it's such a clean 2 reviews, consistent. There's really nothing else to, it's an advice that you've got, you're in agreement, it's done. Some cases you get opposing reviews. In some cases, your view as an editor may be completely opposite of the reviewers. And then there are cases where the editor can go opposite to the reviewer's decisions or suggestions, not decisions, suggestions, and make their own decision. These are all places where you have to be alert, you have to be in there committed. So that's why I would rather not count the number of emails or papers, but rather talk about these things and the commitment to each of these steps. And it should be, in my opinion, it should be a fair review process. It should be clear to the authors why you made that decision. So I try my best. I mean, obviously, I'm not perfect. Try my best to communicate why a decision was made a certain way. And so that requires also thought and good communication, I think. And these are good practices we've established in macromolecules that I'm now carrying on for ACS Polymers Gold as well. So the AU is gold.
It's gold. Yeah, I mean, I know it's gold, but I didn't want to say.
People say, is it AU? Is it AU? It's ACS Polymers Gold.
It's obvious because the symbol is in gold, so it's obvious.
That's right, and it's a gold open access journal. That's why it's called.
So how is the ACS Polymers Gold different from macromolecules?
Yeah, so I hold both my associate editor position in macromolecules, continue that. And I am for ACS Polymers Gold. Right now, the editors are myself, I'm the deputy editor, and my colleague co-editor is Professor Harmantan Clark. He's at ETH. EPFL. He will get very upset that I said that wrong. EPFL, in Switzerland. And so the purpose of ACS Polymers Gold started off with ACS realizing that in a variety of fields within ACS, American Chemical Society, researchers around the world are supported by grants that either strongly encourage or in some cases mandate that researchers publish gold open access. What that means is it's in a journal that is fully open access. There is not even a subscription part to it. I mean, if you think of macromolecules, it has both subscription and open access, right? So that wouldn't satisfy some of those funding agencies that respect gold open access. So in the current landscape of publishing, there is a need for some journals in a variety of fields, including polymers, where those journals are fully open access. So that's really how ACS Polymers Gold came to be. Now, in terms of scope, in terms of review standards, it's essentially like macromolecules, biomacromolecules, macro letters. We have letters and articles and perspectives, just like they all do. And the review standards, because we are editors for both, we use the same review standards. So Professor Clark is the associate editor for biomacromolecules. So we will maintain that same essential standard. And at this point, the publishing world needs this. And maybe moving forward, it will change. We wrote some of that in our editorial. But yeah, so that's the role. So at this point, in the first few years, you'll start to see papers be published that demonstrate that scope and that review standard, the quality that we would like to have in our journals.
Is the submission open for ACS Polymers?
Yes, we have had we've had papers that are going through review. One that's been accepted. The journal started just this year, so and it comes at a time when people are going through all of these COVID issues. Labs are not at 100%. You'll start to see issues come out from fall onwards, late summer, fall onwards, and you'll start to see papers come online as they get accepted. So yes, things are under review already there. Yeah,
sounds good. All the best for that.
Thank you.
So this is we are going to the last parts of the conversation. So I just want to ask, like, that being an academician, is there anything that is in your not to do list? Is there anything that you don't do just because you're an academician?
It's a tough question. like I said, there are some values I have. I guess that's the way I think of it. Rather than technically, what will I not do? I can't think of things that I would technically not do. Maybe I won't do in vivo ever. No one will let me. But more, I think, on the professional side, each day you learn all the new things that you're capable of. At the same time, you start realizing, okay, maybe this was never for me, or this is not for me. And so I would never say never. So I don't have a particular list for that.
Sure.
So yeah, I probably don't have much to add there.
Yeah. So I forgot to ask this actually, and I was very curious to ask this in the beginning itself. Mm-hmm. So with all these appointments, and you're teaching, you have to do active research, you have to be a part of the editorial board, and mm-hmm. and organize things. So how do you manage your time? Like I'm talking about more analytical way of it. Like how do you manage your time? Is it like a software that you use, or is it like you just go with the flow?
I can't go with the flow. I am very disciplined about fun and disciplined about. So I feel I have to have a good calendar of when I do what. So I have a bit of a structure that helps me make time for my dogs that take up a good amount of my time. I have 2 English bulldogs that demand time, is more like it. And I'm a big foodie, so I like to go out and eat. I like hanging out with close friends, so I do make time for that. And for me to enjoy that, sort of to as much as possible in a stress-free manner, I need to have some structure. So I use a combination of my calendars and OneNote to create my own little structure in my chaos. I think the discipline that my mother instilled in me, my father and my mother, was really good. I really think that I'm able to do many things, I think, reasonably well. Reasonably is the way I would say it. Mm-hmm. To my satisfaction, at least. That's how I should put it. Because of that, I think I'm able to create that structure in my commitments. Learning to say no is something that I'm learning every day. Some things I just don't have the time for, even if I really want to do it. But learning to say no is something I'm more and more comfortable with. That way, then I can do a good job of the things I've committed to. So that's, I think, maybe the 2, no software, but these little things, skills that I'm learning. And I keep getting better, hopefully, by years as they go by. Yeah.
Nice. So since we brought up the topic of food, what is your favorite food?
It'll always be my mother's South Indian cooking.
Okay.
Nothing. And I, based on your last name, I'm guessing we are from similar parts of India.
I'm from Kerala.
Kerala. Okay. Yeah. So right next to Tamil Nadu. South Indian food is my comfort food, without a doubt.
Okay.
Nothing comes even close to it. But I enjoy all kinds of food. I'm vegetarian though, but I've been fortunate enough to be able to eat at really good restaurants, really small restaurants, but really good restaurants. And mom and pop places, but nothing gets better than South Indian cooking.
Yeah, especially I'm now in the New Jersey area of it, so I get the best food in the United States.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure.
So yeah, is there anything you would like to add, or do you have any advice for the future generation scientists?
I just want to say thanks to you for doing this. I think each individual, whether it's a researcher in a national lab or industry or academia, and even within academia, each of us are so different, so unique in our personalities. You will never be able to get the full spectrum, but you're doing good sampling of that through your episodes. I'm really glad to be part of this, but you should be given a pat on your back. You should give yourself a pat on your back for doing this, because this is a time commitment, but it's a service. So many students are looking up to different people. Someone who looks like me may look up to me. Someone who looks like some of your earlier speakers may look up to them and say, oh, if you can do it, I can do it, right? I think that's what you're helping with. And so I want to congratulate you for doing this. And I'm really... I feel lucky that you wanted to talk to me, and I'm happy to be a part of this. That's all.
I don't know whether you remember or not. We have met in 2016 ACS. So I think that time one of your students won a poster award.
Oh, okay, yes, that was the
Oh, that's a
ACS
very
in
brief meeting, so
Philadelphia.
yeah.
It was in Philadelphia, and my student Josh Condon had won a poster award. Yes, I remember. If you put it in that context, I can always put my time. My students, I remember their accomplishments clearly in terms of time. So yes, we met at the ACS PIMSy Poly.
Yeah, it was a fun to meet you, and you have been very energetic, and I can. That's why I was like, okay, I like energetic people who can talk science. So because the way the science is portrayed is more like, some way people are like not. I mean, most of the academicians are not very willing to openly talk about other things about research. They're happy about talking about their delta G's and delta H, and like, but when it comes to how to develop their as a career, because we go through a lot of process, but it's more of a elimination kind of process. Like you go all the way, then it becomes like obvious to you, but not for people who are starting. It's not obvious for them to how to become an academician. So that's some culture I want to cultivate, and people to be open about it, and learn about how to transition from an undergrad to a professor or even industry at an R&D level industry.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And each one can see that there are different paths, different personalities that people can have and get further. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm learning so much from all the guests who appeared in my podcast, and I mean, getting to know them a lot more for me and the audiences. That would be a nice experience as well.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Glad to hear.
That's all I got for today. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
That's it for today, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Please find the show notes at thesoftmattershow.com for more details. That is thesoftmattershow.com. You can write your questions, suggestions, and everything else to me at Amal Narayanan at thesoftmattershow.com. See you with another exciting episode soon. Until then, goodbye.